Hi, this is Jeremy Jansen, and welcome to the May 2011 issue of Reason Wizardry. This month we're going to be looking at mastering, and I'm going to split this topic of mastering into two issues because it's quite a large one. I realize it's a little bit different than the sound design that you might be expecting every month, but to be honest, we've looked at a lot of that already in the first 24 issues of Reason Wizardry. Now, if you have something specific you'd like me to look at with Thor, or perhaps Kong, or maybe a Nucleus Sound Lab patch that you'd like dissected, I'd really like your feedback on that. But until I get some new angles to look back at those devices, I'm going to be trying some new ideas like this mastering issue. I've found in my experience talking to producers and musicians that mastering is something that's not very well understood. And even though many of the devices in Reason make mastering quite easy, it still seems like most people just slap on the default mastering combinator, turn a few knobs, and they're done. So this month, what I want to do is go through how all of this works together in terms of mastering and how to change each individual device in the mastering suite to get the sound that you want, which will then segue into next month's issue, where we're going to create an even more complex mastering combinator. For us to talk about mastering, we need some sound material to master. And for those purposes, I took a short amount of time and wrote a small track called Wide Angle. Now, I don't have any illusions that this track is a masterpiece, and I've told subscribers before I don't pretend to be a songwriting expert. But for our purposes, hopefully it's not too offensive to anyone's ears, and hopefully we can polish Wide Angle a little bit more and make it sound even better. So to get started, I'm going to play Wide Angle and just point out some of its features and the different tracks it uses, so you know exactly what you're hearing. So let's discuss what we've got. I've got a Kong doing drums, I've got a Dr. Rex doing drums, and I've got a variety of Thors. I've got one larger combinator patch running a vector pad that's made up by subtractors. I believe all of these patches are from the Reason 5 factory library, although I did create some of the simpler ones during the songwriting process. Okay, so you get the idea, and now we're going to go on to master Wide Angle. Mastering in Reason is quite a bit different than mastering outside of Reason. And that's kind of by definition, because if you have this mastering suite open in your project in Reason, you've also got the rest of the project. So that means while you're mastering, you're also free to continue mixing and, engineering your song. The regular mastering process, of course, is just having a finished, fully mixed wave file and then mastering from there. So you'll find that when you're mastering in Reason, that you're probably going to be going back and changing bits of the mix instead of trying to correct it all with a mastering suite. And that's really most important with the equalizer. The equalizer in the mastering suite is really one of the most important parts of the mastering process. Normally, you'll want to use the mastering EQ to balance out the track by boosting or cutting certain frequencies. But the thing is, often you're better served going back to the mix and adjusting it or EQing individual instruments. And that can be very confusing. So, what I like to do is completely finish up the mix as best that I can, EQing each instrument that needs it, compressing each instrument that needs it, and then leaving the mixing alone completely and concentrating on mastering. If you get bogged down by going back and forth from your mix and your mastering suite, you can actually end up doing more harm than good. And you can also waste a whole ton of time. So for wide angle, I'd like to say I mixed it perfectly, but really it's a quick and dirty job. But let's just say that it was mixed perfectly, and we're going to just deal with it in the mastering suite. So the first thing we're going to do is see what frequencies need EQing. Now, the most important frequencies to control are, of course, the bass frequencies. If your bass is out of control, you're not going to be able to get the full headroom out of the maximizer, and your track is going to lack punch and isn't going to stand up to other well-mastered tracks. So what I find the best way to get started is to loop a section, as I have here. There we go. To loop a section of one of the sections of the song that has most of the elements playing, and definitely the bass and drums are as kind of at their maximum volume. So I've looped that section, and we're going to play it back and tweak the EQ while it's playing. Okay, so what we want to do here is cut off some of the bass without removing anything audible. Now, of course, that depends on your monitoring gear. I have headphones. A lot of people say that mixing and mastering with headphones isn't the greatest thing to do. I've worked with headphones for a long time, and the isolation it gives you and the detail it gives you is really important to the way that I make music and the way that I master music. So it's up to you, but definitely, depending on your monitors, you're not going to be able to hear the lowest frequencies. So what we want to do is figure out how we can just cut enough off so that everything you can't hear is gone. You might say, well, what if I play it on a better stereo later and I want to save those frequencies? Well, if you can't hear them, you don't know what's going on with them, and that's not what you want. So you either need to upgrade your monitors or headphones so you can hear those frequencies, or you need to just get rid of them. So what we're going to do here is start with a low shelf frequency of 100, and so that's essentially that's the neutral level, and now we want to turn down the gain just enough so that we can't really hear the difference, but we are getting rid of some inaudible frequencies. one other important thing is the Q level, and I like to use a low Q level, and I'll show you why. We're going to just have to adjust this gain again by moving it all the way down. We don't want a peak here where the cutoff starts. We want a curve that looks more like that. Okay, so somewhere in the 0.5 to 0.6 range for the Q value is what I'd suggest for mastering. Okay, so now let's find this optimum gain value. Okay, so I'm feeling it somewhere around -7. So now let's toggle on and off to see if we can hear a difference. Okay, so I'm going to settle on a value of about -5.5. At that value, it was slightly audible how much bass we were taking off, but honestly, I liked a bit of the boominess removed. So this is a good value, and I'd perhaps almost lower this value to -7, depending on the exact sound I was going for. All right, now we're going to continue EQing, and we're going to use the parametric bands. Now, I generally don't like to boost when I'm mastering using the parametric bands unless something is really obviously missing. You shouldn't need to boost frequencies in general. If you find that you need a really big boost to give you the sound that you're looking for, very likely something is messed up in either the tracking or mixing stage. So instead, what I'm going to do is look for frequencies that could be slightly tamed to give a better overall sound to the whole song. So once again, I'm going to loop a section of the song, press play. Okay, and now the technique I use for this is actually boosting considerably and then listening to find, let's say, the most irritating frequencies and then cutting those. So let's give it a try here, basically sweeping through the frequency range and listening for what sounds the most irritating, and then we'll remove that using the gain control. Okay. Okay, that's definitely a harsh region in the track, so let's see if we can use a little bit, maybe 3 to 4 dB cut. The Q value is kind of feel. You don't want to use a really tight Q value, or it won't sound natural, but you don't want a really wide one either. So I'm going to say in between 2 and 3 is a good place to start. Okay, we've got one more parametric band, and that doesn't mean you have to use it, but I never actually swept all the way through the frequency range. So I'm going to make one more sweep with our gain turned up. A good idea is to hold down the shift key while you're doing this sweep so you can get a finer bit of detail. Feels to me like around 800 could be cut a little bit, so let's give that a try. Maybe with a bit tighter Q value. Okay, we've tightened up our mid-range some, and the last thing to do is some high shelf control if we want. I don't think this is as essential. It really depends on your track, what it needs. By boosting a little bit and then cutting a little bit, you can kind of tell, does this overly dull the track, or does it add something that well, it's quite specific to your monitors once again, because you may not be able to hear exactly what it's adding. But let's do our best, and we'll neutralize this. We'll start at, say, 7 kilohertz and a wide Q value, and we'll turn it up here. Okay, I don't think it needs any high shelf boost. Actually, a little bit of cut, at least on my listening setup, sounds good to me. So what we've got here is some pretty subtle cuts. What do we have here? -5, -4, about -3, and -3 again. And looking at the curve, it looks like we've done almost nothing. But don't use this visual reference as, you know, whether you've done something effective or not. You have to A/B back and forth again and again by bypassing to hear the changes you've made and whether it's an improvement or not. For me, I think that the bass cut definitely sounds better, and the subtle mid-range changes and a little bit of high end off the top just kind of round the track out. So I like it. Of course, if this was a real mastering process, I would be A/Bing for a long time just to make sure. All right, so we've looked at the EQ, and now we're going to look at the stereo imager. And I really like the stereo imager for sound design reasons. I love to use it to split up sounds into different frequency bands and then process them differently. But of course, it's meant for mastering. And the reason it's useful for mastering is because often we want a different stereo width for different frequencies. And that's mostly, for me, due to wide bass sounds not sounding very good, especially on headphones. If you have a lot of stereo material in your bass line or in your kick drum or anywhere in that low end, it can play havoc with your mix, and it can cause weird beating sounds with other mix elements. So for that reason, it's a great idea to use a stereo imager to at least cut off some of the width of the bass track. So let's start playing from the beginning, wide angle, and we'll have a listen to what it sounds like to take some of the width off of the bass elements. Okay, this section will work for us. So the first thing we should do is solo the low band. Okay, and then change the crossover frequency. We might not want this 1.2 kilohertz. I think that's a little bit high for what we'd like to make more mono. Let's say about 350 kilohertz. You can see that section isn't as wide as the section above it, the high band, but there still is quite a bit of stereo information there, or else we wouldn't be seeing any of those red LEDs on either side of the green LED. So now we can gradually turn this down to mono. And you can hear how much more stable, but also how simple that sounds. So let's hear what the entire mix sounds like with a completely mono lower band. So there's surprisingly not that much difference. There is some strong stereo content in the bass line, and I don't really want that messing up my mix. So what I'm going to actually do is just turn this down a little bit more to under 300, and then turn this up slightly so we're not completely mono in the bass line. I think that's actually quite a large improvement. It's tough for me to give up that stereo element, especially in a great bass line, as I'm a bass player by nature. But often in a mix, you have to make sacrifices like this so that all the elements can play nicely together. And you could have done it in the mixing or tracking stage, but sometimes we get carried away. I think I got carried away with some chorus on the bass. So it's always nice in the mastering stage to just use a little bit of sanity and get rid of a lot of that stereo information from the lower band. So now when we talk about the higher band, you definitely want to keep the stereo information up there. So let's just hear what it would sound like if we went mono on the high band. So that's definitely not something that we want. In fact, we can even increase it a little bit and widen the higher band if you want. It's up to your taste. You have to remember that you probably panned each track carefully, and does that really need to be changed? For me, I like to widen a little bit because what I hear with my headphones actually sounds wider than it will when it's on speakers. So with headphones, you hear more stereo separation since these speakers are strapped to your ears. But when you get all that crosstalk with regular speakers in a regular room, it won't sound as wide. So for that reason, I'm going to say if you're mixing and mastering on headphones, it's probably a good idea to try widening the upper band, let's say a moderate amount by around 20. So we've now looked at the equalizer and the stereo imager, and we're going to move on to the compressor and the maximizer. And these are both very similar. Actually, the maximizer is just a very fast compressor that's meant to deal with entire tracks. So entire mixed songs, whereas the compressor is more for each track. So I don't actually like to use the compressor for mastering purposes because it's just not suited for that type of work. If you do use the compressor to work on an entire track, the problem you'll find is the bass will pull down the compression, and every time your kick drum hits, the entire track will become quieter. So you'll get that pumping action. And some genres of electronic music call for that, but I don't think this song in particular calls for that. And thus, I'm going to remove the compressor, and I'm actually going to replace it with something else that I think is a little bit more appropriate for most songs that I write, and perhaps for you as well. And that is the Scream 4. And so let's just link it up properly here. So our stereo imager is sending out audio to the Scream 4, which then sends it on to the maximizer, with the equalizer being very first in the signal path. So with Scream 4, we're able to use tape compression. Tape compression is meant to be used on an entire mix, and it gives a different sound and different dynamics than the maximizer on its own. So you can use it in concert with a maximizer to get some unique mastering sounds for your songs. So we're going to give it a try now by listening to some looped audio, and we're going to start out with a tape at medium damage, and we're going to turn the speed all the way up because, of course, with a lower speed, it's going to affect the EQ of the song. With a lower speed, it takes off some high end. So I'm not sure if we want that just yet. So we're going to start by dealing with just the compression of the tape. Okay, so that's definitely raising the entire volume of our track. It's really hard to tell what kind of effect it's actually having on the overall sound because of that volume. So what we need to do is lower the master volume to compensate for the extra volume that the tape compression is adding. Okay, that's quite similar now. Let's turn up the damage just so we get the most obvious effect. All right, now let's hear what kind of effect we get from changing the speed parameter. I kind of like that softening. What I'm thinking is maybe we can turn off this high shelf cut and instead use this speed parameter to cut a little bit off the top of our EQ. Okay, so tape compression is something that you definitely don't want to overdo unless you're going for a really retro and dirty sound. But just for the case of this issue, why don't we keep that? And it can always be turned on and off without really changing the overall volume of the track very much. In the end, I think it comes down to a taste thing, whether you want that little bit of extra analog warmth added to your track or whether you want it really digital clean. So with the Scream 4 and its tape compression, you can either use it or not, depending on what you like. Now we're going to talk about the maximizer, and this is going to finish off our mastering. So what a maximizer does is increases the volume of the entire track and reduces the dynamic range in order to do that, so that you can get that radio ready type sound. So the first thing we're going to do is listen to our track with the maximizer engaged by looping some of the loudest audio in the track. So let's push play and see what happens with the maximizer meters. Okay, so you can see right now nothing is actually happening with the maximizer. If you don't get any lights in this meter, that means nothing is actually being limited. And the reason nothing is being limited is because our input audio into the maximizer isn't loud enough. So it's not hitting digital 0 where the maximizer would kick in. So what we need to do is turn up the master level of the Scream 4, which is feeding the maximizer. So we'll turn that up a little bit. Now, with the maximizer, I would hope to get, depending on the track, I'd hope to get maybe 5 decibels of gain. So this is about in that range. I wouldn't want a massive amount more than that, or else you're going to be really destroying your dynamic range. So now we can see we're getting in between about maybe about 5, in between 4 and 6 decibels of gain. So over here we can see that we're actually still clipping. Everything that goes into the red is still clipping. And it doesn't help to increase the volume of your track if you're going to get digital clipping, because that sounds crappy. If you send that to any record label, they're going to send it back because you ruined the master. So we need to get rid of that. And the first thing we can do is turn on the 4 millisecond look ahead. And that delays your whole track. So it actually adds 4 milliseconds of latency. And that's why you should never, ever turn this on when you're tracking. Say you're playing a synth through a maximizer for whatever reason, never use the look ahead because it'll add latency and it'll be all slightly out of sync. If you use it on your entire track, everything is delayed by 4 milliseconds. So it's still clipping, but not as much. That's because with 4 more seconds in the buffer, for the maximizer to read ahead, it's able to kind of see the peaks coming in the audio and plan for it. And now we can completely remove some of this clipping by changing our settings here. If we change it to fast, that means that the compressor in the maximizer is clamping down on the peaks very quickly, and it's letting go of them at an auto setting. It's up to you if you'd like to use slow or fast here. I generally use auto. I think that actually might be a little bit too much volume because I can hear some slight pumping in the track. So let's back off. Well, we could do that here, or we could just back off the input gain here. And sometimes when you hit that wall, when you hear some limiting that doesn't sound good, what you can do is instead of limiting as much, use some soft clipping. So we'll do that now by turning down the attack to slow. So it's not clamping down as fast, and that means some peaks are getting through. You can see that clipping right here. So what we'll do is soft clip those peaks, and they'll kind of distort in an analog way, similar to the Scream 4 compression, but not the same. And you can see they're controlled now. So we have no clipping, but we're not using the limiter exclusively for that. We're using the limiter, but letting some of those peaks through anyways, and those are getting soft clipped. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, and it's up to you. If you want a really perfect digital sounding maximizing process, then you'll want to turn off the soft clipping and use fast limiting, and play with the input gain until you have no clipping at all, or even put a second maximizer in series after the first one. So you can hear the difference there. We've gained quite a bit of volume, and I don't think we've lost too much of the dynamic range and sound quality. Of course, if I was mastering this for an actual release, I'd be listening to the entire track, the quiet sections and the loud sections, to make sure that nothing has been degraded too much. So we've reached the end of this first mastering issue. Next month, I want to come back and discuss mastering again by creating some patches that emulate some popular VST mastering solutions, and just creating some new combinators that give us some alternative ways to master our songs, not just limited by this EQ, imager, compression, maximizer paradigm. So keep in mind that mastering is as much an art as a science, And what I've showed you here isn't exactly what you'll need to do with every track, but it's something to get you started in that now you're not just opening up a mastering combinator and moving some rotaries that don't have any real connection to what's happening inside and what's happening to your track's EQ and dynamic range. Next, we can take the step of expanding the complexity of how we're mastering our tracks. And that's what we're going to do in next month's issue. So I hope you enjoyed this May 2011 Reason Wizardry issue. I'll be back next month with a stunning conclusion to the mastering series. This is Jeremy Jansen. Until next month, cheers.